Hello, everyone, and welcome to our digital energy technical section recorded session. We are very privileged to have a special guest with us, Kayoor Gajarawala. And in this session, we are going to have a conversation, really a dialogue about how do we take forward digital transformation. And both myself, Sushma Bhan, and Michelle Pflueger are part of SPE DETS digital transformation team. I'll let Michelle say a few words about herself, and both of us will play as a tag team in asking Kayoor some valuable information and hear his insights. And Michelle will feel free like adding some from her experiences. So Michelle, first a few words about yourself.
Again, my name is Michelle Pflueger. I have worked for Chevron for 21 years. I've had a unique balance of roles crossing petroleum engineering, offshore operations, and digital strategy.
Thanks, Michelle, and really appreciate your teaming up with me. For myself, I'll just quickly introduce, I'm again part of SPE DETS team. I'm stepping in as a chair of digital transformation while my colleague is on a sabbatical. And in my current role, I'm non-executive director in Icon Science. And prior to that, I had 32 years with Shell. And I retired as the chief data officer of Subsurface and Wells. So with that, I'm going to say a very warm welcome to Kayoor Gajarawala. And let me say a few introductory words about him. So Kayoor is currently the VP IT Engineering at Royal Dutch Shell. He's accountable for global IT delivering, encompassing software engineering design, ERP, information and data, capability development and sourcing. He has spent 25 years in IT industry working in various management and technology positions, including consulting, infrastructure delivery, strategy, applications management, and most recently as the CIO for global commercial and chemicals. And in that role, he was leading and implementing a world-class polymers facility in Pennsylvania. He also led digital transformation and driving business competitiveness. Kayoor received his BBA in finance from University of Houston, and he attended his executive education from IMD in Switzerland. So Kayoor, welcome. And since this is a digital transformation team, we are really going to focus on how we can, focus on the digital agenda. So if you look at digitalization, it has rapidly progressed in the past few years in oil and gas industry. There is huge emphasis on, value-driven efforts. We have seen very successful pilots, especially in multinationals where, it may be driven by an asset or it may be some innovative idea. It's really about connecting strategy to the business needs. However, when we look at digitalization, we see often the bottleneck in how do we scale up these solutions? Companies which have world-class operations, they're in several assets, they have joint ventures. That's really a big question and an ask. So how do you see the need for global scale being addressed? Would like to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Sushma. And I think it's always a balance between global and local, because if you think about, for example, marketing aspects of some of the work that we do in the oil and gas industry, that tends to be more localized, whereas some of the more foundational type systems and digital capabilities we want to be globally standardized and scalable. And one of the things that we've adopted is a market standard and less strategy. And what that does is that allows you to take any of your parity processes that run the various systems that you may have across the globe and use market standard platforms to implement those parity processes. And then it's all about getting as efficient as possible, executing those parity processes and at the lowest possible cost, because cost is always important. But the value is usually going to come from the differentiation that we drive at the customer endpoint in the marketplace. So it's a balance between both. And I think what we are seeing is a tendency to think globally, but act locally.
Okay, excellent. Michelle, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. And one of the challenges, whether you're talking about, scale globally and act locally, it comes down to talent management, right? And with the speed at which this has been evolving and changing over the last few years, there's been a lot of discussions about talent acquisition within IT.
Right.
So how are you thinking about IT talent management? Is IT staffing with the right skills and experiences adequately available for the growing business pool?
Michelle, that's an amazing insight that you're bringing to the table, because over the past few years, not only has digitalization accelerated, but in the past year in particular with COVID, we've seen even a greater acceleration, because the companies that won during a time of crisis were the ones that had the most digitalized supply chains, and also the best technology. So what we're seeing is actually quite a pull on talent in the marketplace. There is not enough talent in the marketplace to satisfy the digitalization agenda of most companies, and particularly oil and gas. So one of the things we are doing is really trying to invest heavily in our own staff to upskill and reskill. And I think that's really important, because the companies with the best people will win. It's not just about the best technology, it's the best people, and then making sure the business actually adopts that technology, and you need people to do that. So I think we really need, as an industry, to continue to focus and invest in our people as our most valuable asset, and use that to drive the advantage in the marketplace.
So Kayoor, just to build on that, so are you looking at talent from specific areas, or with special skill sets, or how are you dealing sort of with this? Or Michelle, even feel free to add to that.
Yeah, so I think in the information data and analytics space, I would say that's probably one of the hottest areas, and also software development. ID&A in particular, as you know, oil and gas has always been a data-focused industry, and big data, actually, a lot of it came from oil and gas years ago. It's not a new thing. And I think what you're seeing is a real focus on using data and analytics to drive better decision making and improved efficiency. So I'd say that's one focus area. The other area is, of course, software development, and that's an area that's been around for a long time. But I think the demand for software developers now exceeds the available supply. So we're seeing a lot more focus on working with universities to upskill and promote the software development program, so we can then hire the people when they come out of university. Michelle, any thoughts on that?
The one thing that I would add is the digital literacy on the Petrotech side. And it's more than just literacy. I mean, within Chevron, we've started sending some of our Petrotechs, the petroleum engineers, the geologists, back to school in data analytics and systems thinking, because we find that it's not always just the IT folks that really can get us to that point where we're making decisions on the data. It's more when you marry and collaborate between the Petrotech side and the IT side. And so we're finding that we're having to invest in our employees on both ends to really get the value.
Yeah, and we're seeing the same. I think the other part is also about driving citizen development, and I think that's what you're referring to, a bit of do-it-yourself, DIY. And DIY can be used in the context of fixing your own stuff at your house, or having your business colleagues do some of the work on their own. And I think what we're also seeing is the digital literacy of some of the students coming out of university that are not in IT is actually quite high.
Yeah, and I think I agree. Besides all the focus on technology and architecture, data management, we really need the business readiness. Getting the depthness of minds, and this digital literacy and DIY you're saying, or do it yourself. I think that needs to be done to maximize the value, because you don't want our geologists, geoscientists, or engineers not being able to get to the systems or get to the solutions. And that really, both of the points you raised on data literacy, I think that's really brilliant. It's something that's felt as the need, and it's not just about IT organization and data organizations, but really the centerpiece your business to work in that. Are there any specific like timings on this you have? Like this is something that has to be done, just from the literacy point of view. Just any quick comments on that before we go to the next question?
Yeah, so from a timing standpoint, we've already started an effort around DIY, and one of our starting platforms is Power Platforms, which is something that I think can be actually used effectively with DIY. I think one of the keys, though, is making sure that when people use these DIY platforms, they're actually using the right and authoritative data sources to make their decisions on. Because if you have bad data, it's garbage in, garbage out. So I think that there's a big focus there. The other focus area is around compliance, because there's quite strict data privacy standards across the globe. And particularly if you're dealing with customer data, you need to know the rules in the various locales and make sure you follow them.
Yeah. Okay, really that makes sense. Another question I really want to ask, in the recent past, we have seen there was inordinate emphasis on costs, especially if you were an IT organization. It was about cost optimization. How do we look at the cheap solutions? Or, I mean, it was affordability was a big focus. So from with IT lenses, and what's happening now? What's the shift? What are the leadership views on it? And this is also in Shell and Chevron. What are the things that you're seeing happening?
So, affordability is always important, right? We have to be competitive in the marketplace. And, in the traditional hydrocarbon business, the cost to pull a barrel of oil out of the ground needs to be competitive and reasonable. So there's still a focus on that. But what I've seen is much more of a shift to value, because IT has become more an enabler for the business and a strategic partner for the business rather than just keeping the lights on. And I think that's the big shift that has occurred. And in fact, there is a bit of blurring of the lines, even from a budgetary standpoint. It's very difficult these days to tell the difference between a capital budget item and one that is digital in nature, because I think they're pretty much the same these days.
Any comments do you see that happening through Chevron's?
I think we're seeing the exact same shift. It's cost, and we need to be as efficient with cost as possible. But that's true for any of our capital investments. We're starting to see the shift in the conversation. What value is it bringing to the table? And it's much more of a value focus. I think the challenge is that's causing a pivot in how you evaluate things on the IT side. It's a significant shift from what we've seen historically when it comes time to budgeting and business plan.
Yeah, and I think one of the points that resonates with me is that as you're thinking about costs and implementing strategies, it's really about the prioritization. What are the most value added efforts, and you want to invest and go forward with that. For example, we had initiatives in Gulf of Mexico that were preceding things, that might have been other arenas. So I think very valid points. Michelle, I'll let you take the lead on next.
I think a lot of this brings into question the age-old discussion about change management, whether it's new ways of working, workflow modifications, the leadership skills that you need to help encourage and push this stuff forward. Success in digitalization really does hinge on how we can implement this change and how we can improve our decision making across the entire value chain. How is change management playing a role in your efforts overall?
Yeah, I think, and we call it transformational change, so it could be different types of terminology that's used, but business adoption is extremely important. In fact, it's likely more important than the technology piece. We are putting a massive focus on our transformational change practice, which is part of our team as well. And those folks, with their main accountability is to do the change impact assessments and then make sure they're there every step of the way to help the business adopt. What we are seeing, though, is with the push to do more digitalization, we are also inflicting multiple changes on many of the same people. So I think that's an important aspect, as well as how much can your business actually absorb. So I think all of that is playing a very key role in how we plan out our projects and really derive our value equations for what we're going to execute.
We're seeing the same thing, and what I find fascinating is my last role leading digital strategy to this role where I'm managing assets and a team within the Gulf of Mexico. I'm having to now wear both hats, and change management was critical when I was in the strategy role, but now that I'm in the adoption space, I really recognize how much needs to go into that to make it successful, because ultimately you can have the best technology in the whole wide world. If you can't get things to change so that you're actually impacting decisions that are going to add value, the technology doesn't matter. And so it's as critical as getting the technology right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also critical to convince the business stakeholder this is good for them. And I'll share a quick example. We had implemented a pricing algorithm for one of our businesses, and it was a fantastic algorithm. Usability was great. But what we didn't do is we didn't spend enough time with the salespeople making sure that they inputted the correct data so the pricing algorithm could actually garner good results. And many of them were taking the step of just inputting a variable and then getting really bad results. And so it just goes to highlight how important that change management aspect is.
Oh, absolutely. I do want to come back to a little bit about the local and global. Really, if you look at the whole multinational companies, whether they are majors or service providers, you have to deal with, assets where they're coming with ideas, or, you're trying to look at, should we go with a standard solution? So the role of standardization, because you're talking about affordability and you don't want to create a flurry of solutions. What are the elements that you have to consider? Because you're also thinking about adoption. You're thinking about innovation, and without impeding some of these efforts, how do you strike a balance? Is standardization the way to go, or again, do you take small steps? What are the practices you're seeing that are working with, especially with your IT support behind it? The people.
Yeah. And I think there's a few different ways to go about it. I think one of the first things is the early scoping conversation that you have with your business partners. And sometimes we're in a hurry to get started too quickly, right. But I think sometimes the discussion in the early stages on, is this a differentiating process or a software that we need, or is this a capability that we need to operate as efficiently and at the right cost point as possible. And that early conversation and alignment with the business may take some time, but it allows you to go fast once you have the agreement. So we spend a lot of time upfront in those conversations, and they need to be strategic in nature. So often these decisions are also escalated all the way to the executive committee. A great example is when we implemented a parity solution for expense management, as an example. Sounds like a mundane subject, but there were a lot of different views on what we were going to do here, and we ended up going with a parity process and a market standard service. So I think that's one part. I think the other part is nowadays getting to a minimum viable product as quickly as possible, an MVP, really, I think, increases your inertia to get adoption going. Because once people start to see things and they're able to touch and feel, you get feedback, and then you can react to the feedback, and then you can iterate. So I think gone are the days of where we're going to do projects where we agree a scope up front, and then we deliver the project 2 to 3 years later. Now it's all about instant satisfaction, get the product out there as quickly as possible, let people touch it, let people give feedback. And I think that engagement really helps us drive the market standard adoption in a positive direction.
Right, I absolutely agree. Starting with small steps and, showing those successes, and then you can replicate rather than starting with a big global scope that does not even lift off. So and that makes perfect sense. Michelle, any thoughts, or you want to wrap up what we heard, the brilliant points?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and pull this into a bit of a summary. Kayoor, your experience and your views, it's impressive. You have basically talked about this amazing balancing act that we have to pull off in order to make digital successful. And it's a balancing act between global and local, standardization versus more of an MVP with customer input, talent investment versus talent acquisition. How do we get the literacy on all fronts? It is one big balancing act that I think we're going to have to continue doing over the coming decade in order to truly drive value and change from this.
I think we are at time. So with that, I really want to say special thanks to Kayoor, who agreed to join and share his views. And again, people who have additional questions can always reach you on LinkedIn. And thank you also, Michelle, for teaming up quickly and being able to help get this session done. So again, on behalf of DETS, I just want to say thanks to both of you.